Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Just last week, 24/7 Sports put out a list of potential risers and fallers for the upcoming 2020 college football season. Today we take a look at each of these 10 teams and why they have been placed on each of their respective sides of this list. But before we get too deep into the analysis, we have to figure out what a riser is and what a faller is. Because a riser does not mean that the respective team is going to be a playoff contender. It does not mean that they are going to be a conference championship contender. It may not even mean that they're going to be a bowl contender this year. What it does mean is that the team could see an increase of 2 or 3 games in the win column. That they're drastically going to be improved in the upcoming season. Doesn't mean it's going to be on the national stage, but compared to what they faced in 2019 and maybe the years before, it will be a major step in the right direction. For the fallers, it's kind of the same deal. Doesn't mean they're going to fall off the face of the earth. Doesn't mean that they're going to not become bowl eligible, that they might not contend in their conference, but that they're going to take a little bit of a step back. Maybe as much as 2 or 3 extra wins in the loss column compared to their record from last year. So right now we're going to start in the rising column, beginning with Miami, who's coming off a very disappointing year 1 under Manny Diaz. Hurricanes went just 6-7. They ended 2019 on a 3-game losing streak to Florida International, Duke, and a shutout loss to Louisiana Tech in their bowl game. That's unacceptable by Miami standards. That's embarrassing by Miami standards and embarrassing for many other teams as well. So it's only natural to believe that the Hurricanes will take a major step forward in year 2 under Manny Diaz. They land the big transfer quarterback in D'Eriq King. They land a new offensive coordinator in Rhett Lashley. The only question mark is their offensive line. That has to improve in 2020 for Miami to even have a chance to take a step forward and win 8 or 9 games this year. Their defense was 13th in total defense last year, and led by Gregory Rousseau and Manny Diaz as their head coach, will remain strong yet again this year. So it is understandable, and it is not going to be too hard to believe to see Miami maybe take a step forward, win 8 or 9 games, and kind of get Manny Diaz off that hot seat after a bad year 1. Then we have TCU right below the Hurricanes. TCU, led by Gary Patterson, is a coach that I always say is a guy you never want to underestimate. The Horned Frogs went just 5-7 last year. And it's been a while since we've talked about TCU as a legitimate national contender. A few years ago, that was the case. They've kind of fallen off just a little bit. But keep in mind, despite going 5-7 last year, TCU had 6 losses by 1 possession. So they didn't make a bowl game, but they were very competitive over the course of the entire season. Their star quarterback in Max Duggan returns, who was great through the air, but even as dangerous on the ground as well. And when you look at their schedule, they host the big dogs. They host Oklahoma State. They host Oklahoma. They host Iowa State. So the schedule lines up for Gary Patterson's Horned Frogs to more than likely get back to a bowl game. But if the chips fall in the right way, unlike they did last year, it could result in a very, very special season for TCU. We then get Northwestern right behind them. And of course, these are in no order. These are not ranked 1 through 5. These are just the 5 teams they believe will maybe rise and fall, courtesy of 24/7. We have Northwestern here, going 3-9 in 2019. Horrible, horrible. Their offense was even worse, 16.3 points per game in the Big Ten. That's not going to cut it in the Big Ten. You're going to go 3-9 or worse when that happens. But Pat Fitzgerald isn't going to allow that to happen again. That was the worst season he's had at Northwestern in his 14-year career. Usually the Wildcats are averaging about 7 wins under Fitzgerald's leadership. Now they bring in Peyton Ramsey, the transfer quarterback from Indiana. So they're bringing in a guy that has plenty of playing experience within the conference already. And their defense returns 9 starters from one that really wasn't too bad last year and now is led by mostly juniors and seniors. So you've got a lot of experience on that side of the ball. Do not be surprised if Northwestern returns to the postseason in 2020. Keep in mind, they're just 2 years removed now from winning the Big Ten West. Right below them, we have Stanford. Last year was very disappointing for the Cardinal. 4-8 for David Shaw and his squad, their first losing season since 2008. But of course, a major reason for that poor success was because of injuries. They lost KJ Costello early. The offensive line battled a bunch of injuries. It was not very strong at all. That was evident by Stanford only averaging 105.5 rushing yards per game last year. Usually they're a very solid, balanced team, but they can pound you on the ground. They were unable to do that. Davis Mills does return, though, at quarterback. Plenty of playing experience last year. Very capable of leading the Cardinal back to the postseason and contending in the Pac-12 yet again. 16 returning starters total. When you've got David Shaw on your side, he's rarely ever failed at Stanford. This is usually a 9, 10, sometimes 11-win team. While we don't think they're going to necessarily get back to that point, they should be able to get back to the postseason and playing in December. And then finally, we have Arkansas, who's gone 4-16 over the past 2 years under Chad Morris. Absolutely embarrassing by any standards, by any team, at any level, across all of college football. So in theory, after winning just 4 games in the past 2 years, including 0 wins in the SEC, the only way to go is up. The Razorbacks, in theory, can't get any worse. Sam Pittman comes in, lands a transfer quarterback in Felipe Franks from Florida, so kind of in a similar situation here like Northwestern. They return Rakeem Boyd at running back. They return a very elite core of wide receivers. And Pittman did a great job of hiring great coordinators in Kendall Briles and Barry Odom, but also utilizing transfers defensively as well in Xavier Kelly and Levi Draper. This is an Arkansas team that probably won't get back to the postseason, but finally should win an SEC game in 2020 and could very well go from 4 wins over the past 2 years to maybe 4 or 5 wins alone in this season. So those are your 5 risers according to 24/7 Sports. We now move over to the fallers, a set of teams that are probably just going to take a little bit of a step back in 2020. We begin with Virginia, Bronco Mendenhall's Cavaliers, who finally won the Coastal last year, made the ACC championship game, and gave Florida a pretty good fight in the Orange Bowl. They finished 2020 at 9-5, and they returned 9 starters defensively. So with a fairly experienced team yet again, many question, well, how are they going to take a step back? Well, it's because they lose one of their leaders defensively, their sack leader in Jordan Mack, and the biggest loss, of course, is their quarterback in Bryce Perkins. A guy who could do it all. Could beat you through the air. He could beat you on the ground. He was a major reason for Virginia's success over the past few years under Bronco Mendenhall. And now that he is gone, they're going to have to find his replacement, and they're going to have to find him early as the Cavaliers open the season against Georgia, have to draw a game at Clemson from the Atlantic. They play Louisville out of the Atlantic. They host UNC and then do travel to Virginia Tech as well. So the schedule does not do the Cavaliers any favors to the point where it wouldn't be surprising to see them take a minor step back from that 9-win season they had last year. But don't put it past Bronco Mendenhall to go out there and win the Coastal again in 2020. It's a relatively wide open division yet again with Virginia, Virginia Tech, Miami, North Carolina. It's anybody's game. We just don't think Virginia is going to be able to match what they did last year. Right below them, you have Baylor, who was 1 win away from making the college football playoff last year. It was a major surprise team for everybody in 2019. They went 11-3. They made the Big 12 championship. They made the Sugar Bowl before falling to Georgia. But now they lose Matt Rule, and they lose a lot of starters defensively, only 2 returning. So I do think Dave Aranda is going to keep Baylor relevant. You're not going to see the significant drop-off like we saw a few years ago when Baylor went 1-11. But you're certainly not going to see Baylor win 11 games in 2020. You'll get a very good idea of how good this team really is after their opener against Ole Miss. But of course their schedule is very brutal at Oklahoma, at Texas, at Iowa State. Baylor went 2-1 in those games last year, if you don't count the Big 12 championship game. There's a good chance they could go 0-3 in those games in 2020, which means they would already match last season's loss total. So Baylor and Dave Aranda more than likely going to take a step back in 2020, but should still remain relevant in the Big 12 and get back to the postseason. Michigan State, right after Baylor. This is a team that no one really knows what to expect. No one really knows what you're getting out of the Spartans. They went 7-6 last year, and Mark D'Antonio left them high and dry by leaving on February 4th, which means that Michigan State had to quickly find Mel Tucker from Colorado to come be their new head coach right around the time of National Signing Day. The Spartans have one of the most difficult schedules in the country, at BYU, Miami at home, a 5-game stretch without a bye week against Iowa on the road, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana on the road, and Minnesota before getting a bye week and then going on the road to take on Penn State, and then questions at quarterback. So this is a Michigan State team that shouldn't have very high expectations and maybe actually won't get to a bowl game in 2020. Mel Tucker's going to have to work a lot of magic here with a schedule like that and so many questions across the board. Utah comes in at 4th on the followers list, like Baylor, going 11-3 last year and was 1 win away from making the college football playoff. If the Utes beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, they're in. They are in the playoff. But they lose their star quarterback in Tyler Huntley. They lose their star running back in Zach Moss. They do bring in Jake Bentley, the transfer QB from South Carolina, and their schedule's not too bad either. Their toughest tests, they get to host at home. Those are against USC and Washington. But this is still a Utah team that I think lost so much experience and so much production that thinking they're going to win 11 games, thinking they're going to go win the Pac-12 South and maybe make a return trip to the Pac-12 championship might be a little far-fetched. So Utah more than likely going to take a minor step back in 2020. And then finally, LSU. Look, when you go undefeated, more than likely the next year you are going to lose a game. I'm not saying you can't have back-to-back undefeated seasons, but it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it will be difficult for LSU after losing so much talent. You lose Joe Burrow, you lose Justin Jefferson, you lose Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you lost 13 players, a record 13 players drafted into the NFL from last year's national championship winning squad. Yes, we know they bring back Miles Brennan, who's going to be the key to LSU's success this year, how well he plays at quarterback. Yes, we know they have Terrence Marshall and Jamar Chase at wide receiver, and Derek Stingley leading the charge defensively. We know that. And we're not saying LSU is going to fall off the face of the earth, that they're going to fall to the cellar of the West, or they're going to only win 8 games. No one's saying that. But to say that they could go 15-0 again, or even 12-0 in the regular season, almost seems a little far-fetched with a schedule like Texas at home, at Florida, at Auburn, at Texas A&M, and then, of course, having to play Alabama in Death Valley just because you're lucky enough to be in the SEC West. So the work is certainly cut out for Ed Orgeron and his squad in 2020. LSU still a legitimate threat both nationally and in the West, but are almost guaranteed to take a step back from that historic team we saw last year. So guys, there you have it. Courtesy of 24/7 Sports, we have 5 teams that they believe will be risers in 2020. 5 teams they believe will be fallers in 2020. What do you think about this list? We want to hear from you. Who do you believe will rise the most out of these 5 teams? Who do you believe will fall the most out of these 5 teams? And who should be up here that isn't? Who's a team that could surprise everybody? Who's a team that's going to disappoint everybody? We want to hear from you. Let's discuss it in the comments below. Guys, thank you so much for watching us here at The Gridiron Expert. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out everything down in the description below for some exclusive college football coverage you do not want to miss. And once again, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on The Gridiron Expert.